Hi everyone and welcome to Barefoot TV, the show that provides you with easy access to knowledge, wisdom and guidance from experts, leaders and spiritual advisors from all over the world to support you in transforming, growing and connecting with all things love, soul and spirit in your everyday lives. Now I am your host Leanne, the Barefoot Medium. I'm an international medium, twin flame, transformational coach and author. I am absolutely passionate about reconnecting people with their loved ones who've passed over, their guides and their intuition, as well as providing access to tools and techniques that can support you in your everyday life to shift through any limiting beliefs, stories, emotions, sabotage patterns, or fears that may be holding you back from creating your dreams or having your desires manifest in your everyday lives. Now kick off your shoes, sit back and relax and enjoy today's episode where I'm joined by Belinda Hayes, a healer, empath, trainer, author and presenter, as well as an event organizer. She does so much, committed to enriching people's lives to allow them to live their own version of happiness. She's also a mother of two beautiful children and a survivor and fighter who knows all too well the power of positive thinking and the ability the mind has to heal the body. Now, Belinda's joining me today to discuss the topic, trauma and the power of positive thought. Welcome, Belinda.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and letting me join you on this amazing program.
Pleasure. I'm just so excited to have a conversation about a topic that can be quite heavy, but there are so many people that have experienced trauma in their life, and I want to debunk a few myths, I guess, about what that is and how we might experience it, and then talk about how positive thinking can help. So tell me a little bit about your journey first.
Absolutely. Look, my journey, one of the things I always say when I share my story is that, trauma is subjective. Everybody has a story and nobody's story is worse than anybody else's. Nobody's trauma is worse. It's so subjective and so personal to us as to what that is. I come from a background where I've experienced trauma. I think we can't get through life in this day and age without having done so on some level. For me, I had a bit of a mixed bag of trauma throughout my life, from sexual assault as a child, being attacked, also losing my first child, and more recently having found myself in a situation of domestic violence. So my trauma has extended across from a young age through into adulthood. And it's only been in the last 4 or 5 years that I've truly embraced myself as a light worker and begun to really move through my trauma and just change my perspective on life and, focus on healing so that I can be the best version of me. And as I do, enrich my life with happiness, and I now empower others to do the same.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing your story and a little bit about your journey. And I think you're right that so many of us have experienced some form of, whether it's one or more types of trauma in our life. And it's really important that we talk about what that is and get it out into the open, because sometimes it's kept in secret or in hiding, a little bit like, abuse or domestic violence in particular is often, kept secret. Yeah. And so I want to bring a little bit of that out. And, trauma is just about something that's really deeply distressing. And it can be something that's deeply disappointing.
Yes, definitely. And, energetically with our bodies, when trauma really does impact our bodies, it can change all sorts of things. And of course, ultimately it can create physical disease as well, and manifest itself in all sorts of physical ways in our body. So trauma certainly is something that, and I think in this day and age, a lot more people are starting to really talk about, mental trauma, like we're getting into mental health and talking along those lines. But there is also that level of emotional trauma, and emotional trauma can be extremely intense. And of course, there's also spiritual trauma. And, when we look at all the levels of energy in our body, it's not just physical and mental, but we do have emotional and spiritual as well. And I know I'm committed to focusing on the holistic health of all four of those, so that if we can actually get through and heal trauma at all of those levels, then we can actually just be really centered and really whole. And then a lot of those people that go through that journey of trauma and ultimately healing from that trauma come out as these completely amazing, different people who have really embraced and owned their story. And there's so much power in that.
Yeah. And, when you're talking about that, it's reminding me of, I lived in South America, in Colombia in particular, for almost 3 years. And, the level of trauma from, a country that's been in war, internal war for over 50 years, and the loss of loved ones, which is what, my work mainly deals with, is pretty huge. But we're not just talking about that heavy level of trauma. There's things like relationship breakdown, or losing a job, or financial stress and trauma, divorce, legal issues. All of those things can create that deep level of distress, and like you said, impact us physically, mentally, emotionally, and even spiritually. So, talk to me a little bit about that connection between the distress and disease, or what plays out in our world every day if we've experienced trauma.
Yeah, and you're dead right. There is again, that level of trauma is completely subjective. I'm a Western woman living in Australia who has a wonderful life. I'm in a first world country, and my trauma, can come from much more of an emotional space around that, compared to some people that are living in much more horrific circumstances. I mean, Syria comes to mind, for example. The level of trauma in the world is really, really huge. But that doesn't downplay the fact that, such as in Australia, we have, a domestic violence epidemic, or all sorts of other things that are going on that people are really playing out. And every single day I see clients myself that come to heal. Usually what happens, and I think this is because society has taught us that, we wait till it's physical to do something about it. So usually, somebody's got a really good example is somebody who goes to have a massage every week, because they've got a lot of pain in their shoulders, and they get that massage. They feel great for a day because, of course, you're loosening the muscles, so of course it's going to feel great, but then it's straight back, and they just can't get rid of that pain. And when we actually can dive deeper into what's going on in their life, we can actually see that, well, okay, we've got this physical manifestation of this pain through the shoulders, but if we go and we look at what's happening for them mentally, or what's happening emotionally for them, we can actually see that it's something else that is causing it to physically manifest. And usually they're holding energy in that space around something else. And when we can move it at that level, spiritual, emotionally, or mentally, whatever it is, then the physical will actually disappear as well. So, that mind, that holistic way, that mind-body connection, as we call it, we have energy that exists throughout our body in so many different ways. And a lot of the time when we are experiencing trauma, we get caught up in only focusing on kind of the actions. What are we doing? What's happening physically for me? And as I said, there is now a lot more look at the mental, but we can be, energy is this amazing thing that in our bodies. Absolutely. It comes from the universe, but it exists within us as well. And it's quite interesting when you can really pinpoint, and as you said, trauma is all different levels. So if you look at that level of trauma and focus on that, and actually work through the trauma, how much else will actually be eradicated or healed in your life as a result as well.
Yeah. And what's popping in is, just a reminder, I've had a couple of clients actually recently with kids who have been complaining. One in particular is popping into mind, of stomach aches and having to stay home from school. And when we really dug into what was going on, there was some bullying and some mental and emotional stuff going on. And from my own experience as a child, that's what I experienced with school, and being really sensitive to energy. Words can, that saying, sticks and stones can break my bones, but the reality is words can actually stay with you and create a story in your mind about worthiness or not good enough or whatever, that can have a significant impact on you throughout your life. So I love how you bring that in as well. And, I just want people who are listening, if you've got kids in particular, be mindful of, if they're suddenly complaining about physical issues going on, what's actually going on mentally and emotionally for them, and ask some questions around that. And, even my nephew a few weeks back wished for his birthday not to get bullied. And it was like, wow, okay, there's something there that needs exploring. And I think that's a big issue at the moment in Australia as well, isn't it?
Most definitely it is. And it's really important to find the trigger behind what is actually going on. We often look at kind of the Band-Aid solution because we're busy people, right? Everybody's busy. And so we're looking to just kind of work out what's going on with that. Let's find a Band-Aid solution. Let's get that fixed, move on. But we really need to look at what is the trigger underneath all that. And when we can heal that, we heal everything else. I have a son who is 6 years old now, and, his anxiety, when he says exactly as you said, the sore tummy, I know now that's just a trigger for his anxiety. And so it's not about his tummy being sore. There's nothing physically going on there. It's about having the conversation as to what's triggering the anxiety, creating the sore tummy, coming back to what is that underlying trigger at all times. And it's just the first step of trying to break through that level of trauma or whatever is going on in that particular moment.
Yeah. And I think that, when we do experience some level of trauma, whatever level that is, and it's, what pops to mind is your trauma is no better than my trauma, or no worse, or no easier, or no harder, or whatever. It just is. And I think that's what we've got to really remember and embrace compassion with. That
Absolutely.
we can sometimes feel really disconnected and really helpless, and it can really trigger our sense of confidence in being able to take the steps that we need to take to heal or create the change or the shift that we want to experience in our life. And particularly if we're talking kids, how do we teach them and empower them to be able to step out of that pain and into being conscious of what's really going on?
Yeah, and one of those, and you mentioned it earlier about having a chat about it, is that using positive thought. I mean, one of the hardest. I mean, depression's a big thing in the world, in our country at the moment, and the hardest thing you can say to somebody who's depressed is think positive. It's, it's a big spiral, but, we look at, I'm passionate about the science of energy. And so in the work that I do, I'm always looking at what science is doing to bridge that gap. How are we starting to prove, for want of a better term, because let's face it, a lot of people do need that proof. And certainly that's what the scientific models are based on these days. And, Dr. Emoto was somebody who did water experiments back in the day, where he had 2 glasses of water, where he sent love and loving thoughts, only thoughts. He didn't say it out loud. It was all just intention and thought to one glass of water, and to the other he sent hate. And then after 30 days, he looked at the molecular structure of that water, And the one that had been sent love actually molecularized to be this beautiful symmetry, like a snowflake, each of those molecules. Whereas the one that had been sent hate, the water molecules were actually haphazard. There was no organized structure to them at all. They hadn't formed anything. And I guess it's important to remember that we're made up of 72% water. And if, thoughts alone can actually change the molecular structure of our cells and water, then, it's an important place to start. I mean, that was a study done back in 1990, so nearly 30 years ago now. And it's a great place to, especially with, as you mentioned, with kids, finding out what the kids are actually thinking. What are the things they're saying to themselves? And I mean, this goes for everybody, not just children, but just how powerful thoughts can be in actually changing our physical makeup, because it can be half of the problem straight away just with what we're thinking.
Yeah, and I love how you bring that in, because really when we have some physical issue going on in our body, it's often started with a thought that's become emotional, and then we haven't addressed the thought or the story that we've got going on, and then we haven't addressed the emotion. And so we get it physically, because most people, when they get something physical, they'll do something about it, whether it's go for a massage or go for a healing or go and see a doctor or whatever it might be. But the reality is, coming back to that story is so important. And, even for ourselves, if you feel like you've been triggered, sit down and go, right, what story am I telling myself today?
Yes. And to others, you mentioned about having compassion. You can be standing beside somebody who's completely broken and you don't know. You don't know what's going on with somebody. I've just returned from a weekend retreat as a guest speaker with 10 beautiful women who I met, and they were amazing. And it wasn't until they shared their stories that I realized the level of trauma in the room. And I was like, wow, you could just never know that if you met them down the street, what they were going through. And even things like, you're driving in your car and you have that person who starts road raging, rather than kind of sending them those thoughts or that energy of hate in return, it's always just about sending love, just sending them love, because that's the power of the positive thought, sending love. And what that's doing is helping change their molecular structure. It's helping them to actually heal without even realizing it. And of course, every time you're sending something positive, you're healing yourself at the same time, rather than staying in that negative space where it kind of fuels it. And I know it's not easy, but to be aware of it is the very first step. Be aware of what you're putting out there, what you're saying, what you're thinking, so that you can start going, okay, what is it that I'm saying to myself, and how am I actually maybe exacerbating this even more?
Yeah. And I guess that's where we come into those emotions as well. And our emotions really are the things that show us where our mindset is, in terms of whether we're in that positive, uplifted, empowering space, or in that fear, stuck, trauma, disappointment, hurt, whatever it might be. And I want to give everybody permission to feel whatever you feel, and to be okay with it, and to stop judging where you're at. And even the story that we're talking about, we are not going to be 100% positive 100% of the time. We are human beings having a human experience. We have a life. And so it's just giving yourself permission to be conscious, like you say, of what's the story, and that's okay. Now I'm aware of it. I can start that momentum in a different direction by going, you know what, I'm okay. I'm going to accept that that's what the story is, and have compassion with yourself or with someone else, or an event or an experience or whatever it might be, and then to be with your emotion. And so many of us are taught not to experience anxiety. what does anxiety feel like in your body? And these beautiful, amazing kids that we've got that are conscious, you know, make them aware of when anxiety comes into their body. It's just something saying that there's a story going on that's not really true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They in science, they call it this beautiful thing called the heart-brain coherence,
Yeah.
where these two actually, emotions are guideposts for us. We are emotional beings. That's kind of what sets us apart as, as human beings. And having these emotions isn't meant to be something that disrupts your life. It's actually meant to be something to help guide your life so that you can feel at all times and know where you are.
Yes.
Our brain only has one job, literally one job, and its job is to just scan the environment constantly and tell us if we're safe. It's that old reptilian brain. Am I safe? Am I safe? And it does that all the time. It does that when you meet somebody new. If you see a stick on the ground and you think, oh my God, is that a snake? Oh no, it's okay. And when we're put in situations that cause us to be unsafe, our brain will use that and continually play it over and over and over again to teach us how to be safe next time. You get cut in line at the shopping centre and you want to kind of say something, but you don't because you're a nice person and you're compassionate, but your brain can sit there for 3 hours later thinking about what you should have said. I should have said this, because it's trying to work out how to keep you out of that situation next time, because it's, wants to keep you safe. Whereas on the flip side, you make a cup of coffee in the morning, you get up and you go out and you watch a beautiful sunrise. You stand there in that moment. You're not thinking anything. Your brain has nothing to feed back because there's nothing unsafe there. Instead, it all is about the heart. It's all what you're feeling. And you walk away and 3 hours later, you actually haven't thought about it once again, because your brain doesn't need to keep feeding that back to you, but instead you felt it, which is a very different thing, and when we keep recognizing that feel and get our brain to shut up long enough, then we can actually start to go, okay, what's actually going on? Oh, this is how I feel about it. Wow, my brain's not sending me mix all these signals that I don't need. What I actually need is to listen to this. And when we can get those two of them, that heart-brain coherence happening, then we can start getting into a space of recognizing, realizing, releasing all those wonderful things that help on that journey of actually just being happy.
Yeah. And so that kind of brings me to, what are some of the strategies or tools or tips that you would share with viewers about how they can start either releasing or stepping into embracing more happiness in their life?
Yeah, look, number one, and I mean, we don't, us spiritual type people, we don't say this just to sound like broken records, but meditate. Meditate. What happens when we meditate is we just go into that place of inner stillness where we do shut up our mind, and it allows us to start feeling into our body. That's number one. I mean, if you're not doing that at all, start. If you're doing it, do it more often. We can do that mindfully though, and that's through breath work. So breath is so important in slowing our body down so we can hear it. It also brings us out of, when we're in a stressful state, and it may be that we're having a conversation with our partner if we're in the midst of divorce, or it may be, a conversation with a boss, then what happens is we release all these kind of what we call stress hormones throughout our body. And so the only way to release those and make sure they don't attach to ourselves, because that's how, disease is formed when we get them all attached to ourselves. We don't want them to. They're in our body. Adrenaline's a really good example. Yeah. It's necessary, but we don't want to keep it in our body for too long. And so what we need to do is breathe that through our blood and breathe it out. So lots of breath work. We get into a state where we just shallow breathe most of the day. We want to bring that breath right down into our bellies. And if we can consciously do that, then we are bringing ourselves back into connection to our body, which allows us to then focus on the feelings, and again, shut our brain up. The other thing is actually talking it through. And there's so many different people in different ways you can talk through. What often happens is when we talk, we start saying things we didn't realize we thought, because our heart and brain go into coherence, as I mentioned. For some people, this is writing, so journaling or writing out, and they kind of just spew everything onto a page. And then when you read it back later, you're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize I was feeling like that. And you can kind of start to see. So these are real practical ways. And the same with kids. You can do all that with children as well, I mean, if you can get your kids to sit still long enough, yeah, great. I have one who will do 15 minutes of meditation and another one who I can't get to sit still. So for me, it's a lot of talking with them and teaching them breath work and even, meditation and prayer, they're the same thing. If they're just interchangeable words, if prayer is the word you use instead of meditation, then that works, then that's the same thing. It's about just quietening down your mind and speaking to your higher self, whoever and whatever that is for you, so that you can just bring through and connect into your body and connect into what you're feeling.
Yeah. And I really love how you talk about breath in amongst meditation, because there are people who go, but I can't stop the thoughts in my head. And really, meditation is just mindfulness or breath, and just being present to your breath. And with a lot of busy people, you can do that in a way that the ancient Indigenous people do. And you can do walking meditations. When you're washing the dishes, when you're vacuuming the floor, when you're mopping, whatever's going on for you, just come back to that breath and really get yourself present to it. The other thing that I love that you talked about was speaking, because that our heart space is our guide. It guides us in the direction of joy and happiness and love for us. It's neither right nor wrong, it just is. And we're meant to experience all of those emotions in the heart. The head is the logical brain, it's the action taker, it's the planner, the organizer, the thinker, and it's meant to do that. But what's really interesting is our throat is what's meant to express that emotion. So we're meant to bring the emotion we're feeling up from that heart space and out through the voice and express it. And once we do that, whether, like you said, through journaling, and I'm a big fan of journaling, or talking through, sometimes we'll hear, and for me, I hear my own energy and go, oh, there it is. And so I'll often say to a friend, hey, have you got some space? Can you just hold the space for me? I need to talk something. Don't need your advice, don't need opinion, don't need solutions, just hold. And I'll talk it and I'll hear it and go, there it is, thank you. And so absolutely. I really love how you bring those in.
Absolutely. And it's so important. I love what you just said about holding space, because so often we go for solutions when we're hearing somebody, when we're listening and somebody's talking to us, we just go for solutions, and often that's not at all what people need when they're talking. They actually just need somebody to listen, and often they'll work through their own solutions in what they're even speaking about. I do it all the time. I'll be like, I need to talk to you about blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden I just keep talking. And before I know it, I go, well, anyway, thanks for the chat. And they're like, yeah, no problems. I'm glad I could help. I've kind of worked it out myself. So yeah, holding space is a beautiful thing that you can learn to do. I know they talk about being a good listener, but being a good listener and holding space together is so important and can be such a healing benefit for the person who's doing the talking. Definitely.
Yeah. And I think for people who've experienced trauma at whatever level, it's often about having their trauma heard. So being seen, being heard, and being loved are the three things that often people who've experienced that just need someone to understand them, to accept it, and to love them anyway.
Yes, absolutely. And, when somebody else can recognize their story and acknowledge it, then that person can take ownership of it. And when you can take ownership of your own story, then that is the most powerful thing you can step into, because, from then you can just move into that story and work out what it is that you want moving forward, or work out what you need, whether that's healing, whether it's release, whether it's conversations, forgiveness, whatever place that is. But the first part is recognizing the story exists, and then stepping into ownership of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And, what's popping into share is, recognizing your own stress or trauma patterns. And, one of the things for me is I'm being reminded as a child, what I apparently used to do as a baby was hold my breath and I'd pass out. And when I am triggered or in that stress mode, I notice that I hold my breath. So it's still something that's a pattern for me and I tense the shoulders and the neck, and the neck and the shoulders get sore. And so that's my physical trigger and my physical reminder that I've stepped into that trauma pattern, and there's something that needs shifting and healing and moving. And so what I'll often do is the same process as I do with my coaching clients, and go, right, Leanne, it's time to sit down and go through this. What's the story? Okay, what are you feeling about that? And what is it that's being invited to be changed here?
Yes, and that's, that in itself is really powerful when we can actually recognize those triggers. And that's usually the first sign. The first sign can often be physical, a physical manifestation of some kind. I love what you said about the shoulders. A lot of people start to do this when they get a bit stressed, up go their shoulders.
Yeah.
It all kind of comes from the belly, because the belly center, our solar plexus chakra is the area of emotion. So, kids can flick through emotions like this. It all kind of comes out from their belly. And I guess one of the practical tips I could give you for when you start to recognize those signs and symptoms is to get yourself grounded. And, that's about, that we make jokes about, go and hug a tree, but that's a legitimate thing. The earth itself, the planet Earth actually gives off negative ions. They're what we call human energy. And when we take our shoes off, or when we sit on the ground, or when we go into nature and we're stressed, our body actually has an excess of positive ions in it. That's what's being created in our body. And so when we sit on the earth, or we stand on the earth, then we start to actually absorb those negative ions, or the Schumann energy the earth's giving off, and it balances us. I mean, that's where those words come from: balance, grounding, centered. It's why nature is so healing. So I'll often, sometimes if my kids are getting really worked up, I'll say to them, come on outside and come sit on the grass and talk to me. And that in itself, just that action of sitting down on the grass, is already starting the process of getting them to focus back, get their body grounded and centered, bring that physical stuff away that's starting to happen, so that they can focus and move into the emotional and mental level and actually start having that conversation.
Yeah. And I was just looking around for this, which is, you reminded me, I've got this beautiful big black obsidian crystal, and my niece, who's about 9, when she's got the other half of this, manifested it beautifully, so that when she goes into that anxiety, she actually picks that up now to allow herself to send the energy to the crystal. And kids are really awesome at being able to do that. And she'll actually ask me, because I do aroma touch with beautiful essential oils as well. And, I put some on her and said, I'll just do a little bit. She said to me afterwards, Auntie, can you please do the full one next time? And I said, it's 45 minutes. I don't care. So I love that she recognises, and she'll put her hand out when she wants a aroma touch massage on her hand, just to get her back and into that space. So, kids are really intuitive. Allow them to tell you what they need. And you're really intuitive as well. Come back to that beautiful heart space and just go, what is it that I need right now? Is it a hug? Is it to talk to someone? Is it to go and have a nap? Is it to go and meditate? What is it that I need? And come back to you.
Yes, and you've got to do them in combination, come into what you need, think, feel what it is you need, then let your brain do its job and process the logical reason of how can I get that? Who's around? Where can I get a hug from? Do I have a crystal? But it starts here rather than starting here. And I think that's the important thing that we need to start shifting, come out of our heads into our hearts, and then allow our brains to do the logical reasoning. That's what they're there for, but bring it back into this space here. And I love that you've mentioned some real natural, beautiful products and tools that they can use, essential oils and crystals, or even something that you can transfer that energy into, because all of those things hold beautiful, incredible energy that's come from a really relaxed place. None of it is, you wouldn't, if you were stressed, go to a shopping center, for example. The chaoticness of that just would not be beneficial. Whereas if you can sit still, use your oils, or sit with crystals, or sit on the ground, or go to somebody for that hug, all of those things are just going to bring you back into your heart space, ground you, and then allow you to process what needs to be processed, either in that moment, or maybe it's bigger than that, in which case you just start putting an action plan in place.
Yeah. And I love how you say that, the heart and the head have to work together. They're there for a purpose. We just need to get them working in alignment with each other and supporting each other. And you're right, getting that head and that logical brain to go, right, how can I implement that? What's the plan? What's the action to take today to move me out of the trauma that I'm feeling again, or out of my trigger, or out of that wound, or out of stress mode? Is it to go and sit on the grass and have a talk, or just go and be,
Yes.
And be okay with that. It's okay to have a day. I said to a friend a while ago, I put myself in the corner for the day until I could play nice.
Perfect.
Why as adults do we not give ourselves permission to do that?
Absolutely. And that's about self-care. It's really about self-care. These are things that keep our stressors out, moving in our body and then released, rather than kind of attaching. It's about, like you said, giving yourself permission, but making it also a bit of a part of who you are, or part of your routine. Somebody said to me, if you closed your eyes right now, what's your absolute ideal of where you want to be? And I'm like, sun on my back, a good book, a glass of wine, no kids, and then I kind of thought to myself, I can do that. I could actually grab 10 minutes on a weekend that I could sit out in my backyard and say to the kids, no, you're not coming out and read a book, So there's really no reason that my ultimate self-care routine couldn't exist. It's just about making sure you find time and actually scheduling it in amongst, the soccer and the hockey and the meetings and the work and whatnot. But it needs to be just as much of a priority as everything else.
Yeah. And I think that's the power of the positive thought as well, isn't it? Going, you know what, I've got this story going on that I can't do that. Actually, you can. It's just coming back to being positive about, no, I can create that space. I can give myself permission.
That's right. And it's not about saying your life is positive. Some people aren't living in a situation where their life is positive. It's not about that. It's about just saying, with the thoughts that you're thinking and keeping them in a positive way, like everything's going to be okay. I am loved. I give love, I am beautiful. Often, but we are human beings, and there's many times in the day, that I might roll my eyes if my kids are causing, and often if I catch myself sending a thought out that is negative, I actually follow that with cancel that.
Yep.
Cancel that. Don't want that. Don't want that energy going anywhere. I mean, energy can never be destroyed. It's only ever transferred. So if we have a thought, we're sending an energy, an energy wave out. And I don't want that wave hitting anybody. I don't want it coming back at me. And I don't want it going anywhere else either, especially if, let's say it's the kids, and the kids are kind of just being, their awesome sibling selves where they're usually arguing, and you kind of just like, guys, and you think to yourself, can you just shut up for 5 minutes? You're not saying it out loud. It's a thought. That energy's got to go somewhere, and you don't want it hitting your kids, So when you find yourself sending that negative thought out, just going, cancel that, I love how well you two get along. Let's send that out instead. And then when that energy hits them, it creates that, it creates the two of them getting along. And so that's what you're trying to actually achieve. It's about just recognizing how you're feeling, what your brain's sending out, and just giving yourself the opportunity to switch those around. And it does happen. There is a universal law of creating order out of chaos. And so when we have chaos in our lives, the universe attempts to try and match the frequency of what we want. And if we're constantly sending out negative, the universe will match that. It will. Okay, that's a universal law. And so we have to be sending out, you talk about manifesting, sending out positive thoughts, sending out what we want to manifest, holding those beautiful affirmations in that positive space in all sorts of ways. And that's with emotion as well, holding gratitude and love and hope if that's necessary. And then just allowing the universe to create that order out of chaos with that energy, not negative energy.
Yeah. So, and I love how you bring that in. So thank you for that, because, lots of people think law of attraction and that's it. But there's so much more to manifesting and creating, and allowing yourself permission to catch any negative stories that you've got going on, and don't take action from that space. Clear it, cancel it, like you said, and just come back into your heart space, come back into you, and then put your positive energy out there. Then you'll create a different ripple. You'll create the compassion, the understanding, the acceptance, the love, the joy, the happiness that you're wanting in life, or peace even. If that's the next best feeling thought, reach for a better feeling thought. And it might be, if you're angry, it might be frustration. That's okay. Yeah. And then just work yourself through that. So thank you for sharing all of that and having a beautiful, amazing conversation about trauma and how positive thought can support us to move through it. Can you share with everybody where they can connect with you if they'd like some more info?
Certainly can. So my name's Belinda Hayes, the spiritual teacher. So if you're looking for me, you can find me online at belindahayes.com.au. Otherwise, I am on Facebook. You can just find the Spiritual Teacher AU on Facebook, or search for Belinda Hayes and add me as a friend. I'd love to get to know you and connect with you that way. And yeah, see what if you're looking for somebody who can help, see what I can offer. Otherwise, I write blogs and I share beautiful interviews with amazing people like Leanne. And so there's so many people out there that are able to assist and help you and just allow you to change that mindset. And, you never know what your world can look like a year from now. It can be completely special and amazing and wonderful if you believe it so and you put that thought out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am going to just ask you to share a little bit for viewers about your beautiful Soul Stories conference that you've got coming up in October.
Yes, I would love to. So I am also an event manager. I run a business called Soul Events. So that's soulevents.com.au. And we have a 2-day conference coming up in October at SeaWorld on the Gold Coast. So that includes 10 amazing presenters, including Leanne and myself as 2 of those presenters. And we've entitled that conference Own Your Story. So it's very fitting for what we've talked about today. And these presenters that will be there are going to be offering tools and techniques that allow you to move through to own your own story, as well as sharing their own journey. And the beautiful thing about these presenters is they've taken their journeys, they've taken their trauma, and they have owned the story behind it, and then gone on to do amazing things, either within their life or within the community. But either way, the power of the ownership of their story has led to a very, very different outcome for them. So it's going to be a sensational weekend. The conference ticket includes a Saturday night dinner, which is a special dinner being held in the Shark Bay Aquarium in SeaWorld after hours. And there's lots and lots of other little goodies and things happening. So if you're interested in checking that out, jump onto soulevents.com.au and then click on the information for the conference, and you'll be able to see all the different packages and exactly what's involved that weekend, because we'd love to have you join us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so looking forward to not only being able to share my story and support people with tools and techniques for their everyday life, but listening to everybody else's story as well. So come along and join us for the Soul Stories Conference in October. Thank you, Belinda. And for those of you listening who would like to connect with me further, jump on my website, thebarefootmedium.com.au, or check me out on Facebook, YouTube, and all of the other social media things, Leanne the Barefoot Medium as well. And wherever you are, whatever you're experiencing in your life, whether it's trauma or peace, take some positives from your experiences, move into love for self, move into peace for self, and reach out and connect with people if you need help and support. Have a beautiful, amazing month, and I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode of Barefoot TV.